Well, hi, everybody. I'm Richard, and I'm your facilitator today, and I'll introduce myself after the other folks on the screen do so. Eracism is the slogan of the group Erace, which was formed in New Orleans in the summer of 1993. We seek ways through person-to-person communication to show that we are committed to treating all human beings with love, respect, empathy, compassion, and humility. Please join us. Erace is an organization that does not espouse any political party, and we have no religious affiliation. We believe in acceptance of all people, and no personal attacks of any kind will be tolerated. We come with the intention to listen, learn, and not to argue. And I'll read the land acknowledgement. We begin today by acknowledging that we know what we know as the United States is the ancestral and unceded territory of many indigenous peoples, and that there are many more nations and tribes that could be named here. Members of our meeting group today are the lands of the Chitimacha and Choctaw in New Orleans, the Creeks and Cherokees in Atlanta, the Tonkawan, Lipan, Apache, Comanche in Austin, the Lenape and Piscataway in the Washington, D.C. metro area, and the Wampanoag and Nipmuc peoples in Boston, the Coahuila and Mojave in Riverside, and the Lumbee in Fayetteville. We thank their ancestors for being stewards of these lands through the generations and through today. We need to protect and honor the history and people of these places. Despite centuries of colonial theft and violence, we should always remember that we are all still on indigenous land, and it will always be indigenous land. So now we'd just like everybody to briefly introduce themselves. I'll start with the upper left screen, and Phyllis.
Good morning, I'm Phyllis. I've been coming to Erace since 2008, and I'm in New Orleans.
Thanks, Phyllis. Marla?
Good morning, my name's Marla. I've been coming to Erace since around 2019, and I'm in the New Orleans area.
Thank you, Beatrice.
Good morning, I'm Beatrice. I'm here at East Point, Georgia, outside of Atlanta, one of the co-founders of the Atlanta group with my deceased husband, Larry. Glad to be with you all.
Thank you, Beatrice. Marion? Marion?
Hello again, everyone. I'm Marion here in New Orleans in the Gentilly area. It's good to see everybody.
Good to see you again. Teresa? Teresa?
Good morning. Yes, I had to unmute myself. Thanks. I'm Teresa Roberson. I've been coming since August 2022, I believe. I'm in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And the reason I'm all smiles today is that we're celebrating my dad's 86th birthday today. It's actually on Wednesday, April 10th, but you know, that's a milestone. So
good to hear.
After this, I'm going to change and get into the party dress. Thank you.
Thanks,
Yay.
Teresa. And Louise?
Yay, I'm Louise. I've been coming to Erace for over 2 decades, first in New Orleans, and then after Katrina, we moved to Austin, so that's where I am now.
And last but not least, Reverend Story.
Good morning, I'm Larry, and I've been coming to Erace since about 1995. Glad to see everybody this morning.
And again, I am Richard and have been with Erace since the beginning in 1993. This is my first facilitation on Zoom, so please bear with me. And let's see, we are moving on to explain the format of the meeting, which I think everybody on the screen knows, but for folks out in YouTube land, we'll go over it again. So we ask everyone to keep themselves on mute. And we do keep a list is kept, and people are called on in order by me, the facilitator. So we ask you to raise one finger to be put on the list, and please wave it wildly so I can be sure to see it. And please respect and not interrupt the speaker. No side comments to others, no personal attacks, no name calling. The point of the discussion is to listen, learn, not to argue. And as far as clarifying questions, after a speaker is finished, you can raise 2 fingers and go out of order to ask a clarifying question, not to give your opinion. For example, I didn't understand what you meant by a particular word or term. That's a clarifying question. Or can you clarify what you meant by? Another type of clarifying question. The questions are not to further the opinions of the asker. Clarifying questions do not require a long monologue, and questions that do not qualify as clarifying will not be allowed, and the person can go on the list. Only 2 people are allowed to ask clarifying questions per speaker. So the reason that I brought this topic, as you, if you've read the article and listened to the brief interview on NPR, you'll recognize that Mr. McWhorter is a sociolinguist. And way back in the 70s, when I was an undergraduate in St. Louis, I had thought about majoring in linguistics. It's always interested me, and particularly in respect to topics like this. And one of the reasons that I didn't go into linguistics was at the time in the 70s, it was either much too technical, it was very mathematical, way above my head, or there was sociolinguistics at the time in the 70s. But the course that I took in it happened to be not that well taught. And the professor, when I was trying to figure out what to do as a term paper, suggested, well, why don't you look at the use of the word the and as a difference between how women and men use those 2 articles. And I said, you know, if this is what sociolinguistics is all about, I'm not sure that's for me. So needless to say, I got out of it. But I think Mr. McWhorter raises obviously some much more serious issues in his capacity as a sociolinguist. And I think we are ready to open the floor to discussion. Who would like to lead off? Yes, we have Louise. Go ahead, Louise.
Oh, sorry, I've got to time myself. So I thought he made some very valid points along the way, and I really wish I could read or see the whole interview, because I know it was only snippets. But there was a couple of things that I picked up on. As he says, telling people not to be racist or thinking of those inequities as some abstract version of bigotry doesn't help people who need help, which, is up to a point, correct? But surely we do need to study ourselves and learn history, and because there's a lot of people that didn't know about basically they need their eyes opened, and if they didn't think that there was any injustice, how can they fight it? And I think a lot of people didn't know or don't know or are ignorant to it. So I thought that was a bit off. And also I wanted to ask him why he thinks systemic racism is a clumsy term. I thought that was odd. I don't see it's very clumsy. I thought that was quite succinct, and I just don't see a problem with that. That was just my 2 things that jumped out at me. That's it.
Thank you, Louise. Anybody else? Marla.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this article. I actually thought I agree, there are some valid points in here, and he raises some interesting questions. The couple of phrases that he repeated a couple of times, and then when I read more about him in other articles, because I knew very little about him to start with, I found he uses those same phrases over and over again. The talking about the folks, it's not helping the people who need help. And I don't know, something just kind of made me cringe a bit when he says that. I'd like for him to, I guess, expound more upon what he means about needing help. And then the notion that this has become something like a religion where people are asked to no longer question, but just believe. I take issue with that notion. I'm not sure if I can articulate exactly why I take issue with it, but I don't think that being anti-racist is not about questioning. I mean, I still have a lot of questions myself, but I don't ever doubt that racism exists. I don't know, that's not what he's saying. I understand that, but anyway, a couple of those things just didn't quite sit right with me. And maybe somebody else will be able to articulate better why if they didn't sit right with you also.
Okay, thank you, Marla. I believe Beatrice is next.
Yeah, a couple of things. I agree with what Louise and Marla have said. I heard this interview. I also bought McWhorter's book, most of which I read. To some degree, I find him, he wouldn't say this, of course, a contrarian. I mean, he's got a position and he's justifying it with really good logic. I think he's trying to make anti-racism a religion by saying it's something that you just believe. And rather than with religion, you would believe in Jesus, we believe in anti-racism. I think that the two things, anti-racism and woke and all, the things are not mutually exclusive. We don't have to decide that there are no microaggressions or there's nothing to this anti-racism work or racism or systemic racism. Again, that may not be what he's saying, but that's how it comes out, especially to people who the term woke racism generates something in them. I think it is not either or. We have to work on what is specifically systemic racism, and if that's called anti-racism work, if white fragility and Ibram X. Kendi's work is valid, and it is, then it doesn't have to, that doesn't have to disappear because of what he believes. I think he's preaching a gospel that he wants to preach, and because he's a linguist, he has wonderful words. As I said, I read most of his book, and then I got to the point where, come on, baby, come on, So a good article, good conversation, and there's some valid information here, but at the end, when we talk about what people need to be taught and they're not being taught, what are you talking about? What does that mean? Especially, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Beatrice. I believe the list is open at this point. Yes, Phyllis. Go ahead, Phyllis.
I just felt that trying to put anti-racism work in a religious framework was awkward. It didn't really work. He kind of uses the term, I don't know if it's in this article. I read a critique of his book because that was kind of like had good and bad things to say, but he uses the term the elect, which to me sounds like the elites. And I thought that was strange. I also felt like, for me, anti-racism work has been about critical thinking. It has not been about just buying something and believing it and not questioning, which I think is what he thinks religion is, which I would also disagree with. And I felt like, is he trying to make sure white people aren't uncomfortable by anti-racism and the so-called wokeness? Because I also don't agree with the people are like fired and canceled, and I think there's unrepentant people who get called out and don't respond well, and then there's people who are open to learning and they are able to be called in and get more education. I mean, I think every white person in this meeting has probably been called in by somebody at some point. And you just have to not let your fragile little white self fall apart when that happens. So, thank you.
Thank you, Phyllis. The list is open at this point. Yes, Reverend Larry. Reverend Larry, can we hear you? I'm not.
Okay, I'm sorry, I still
There we
have
go.
stuff on mute. But I gather particularly on page 3, where he says that McWhorter argues that certain strains of anti-racism and its adherents have effectively created a religion, and a zealous one, that stifles nuance and debate. And his new book is called Woke Racism, How a New Religion Has Betrayed Black America. I think my understanding of it and in context is that there's a certain way to talk about racism in America, just like there's a certain way to talk about religion in America. And if you speak contrary to the norm, then you are an outsider and you're going against the grain. And you know, on page 4, it says the idea is that you are to be fired if you disagree or violate anti-racism's norms. And McWhorter's telling you are to be dismissed from polite society. You are to be sanctioned. You can't be among us. You're dirty. In other words, if you could be an anti-racist, but if you speak against the norm, you're an outsider. You know, sometimes I speak against the norm. I don't buy in. Sometimes the person with the loudest voice and the biggest platform are the ones that a lot of people follow after. And so if you've got a national audience like an Al Sharpton or some of the others, you know, people tend to link that as the anti-racist position of Black America. And if you go contrary to that, you're an outsider. You know, for instance, I may go contrary to the call that voting is our way to quote unquote freedom. I don't believe it. I think we're in a situation where we've been bamboozled to think that voting is going to change the situation. I'm out. I'll get back on the list.
Back on the list. Okay, Larry. Anybody else before Larry continues? Go ahead, Marla.
It was just an additional thought on some other things that I read about John McWhorter. Apparently, he doesn't believe in reparations, which I thought was also interesting. I didn't have a chance to fully delve into exactly why, but I did see that he didn't. And then he also alludes to the fact that Black and brown folks are, in lots of ways, he feels responsible for, quote, being in the current situation. He might have even used similar words, and that wasn't situation, but the way things are now, it's because of behavior. And he points specifically to behaviors, not systemic issues. So I thought very interesting. And I just, again, about the anti-racism being like religion and not questioning, I do think this is probably the part that bothers me the most about his whole analysis. I mean, it's about personal growth also, and, you know, learning and upliftment. And when he asks specifically, talks about anti-racism is here and it exists, but what exactly is it doing to actually do anything to elicit change? I mean, I think he almost views it as something that's circular, that we're caught in this cycle and this web of constantly listening and learning, if you will, for lack of a better term. But there are action items. I mean, there are very clear actionable things that we do within anti-racism that, you know, lead you to questioning and growth and action in your own community. You know, paying individual reparations to folks, I mean, that just touches the top. So I disagree with his analysis of that.
Thanks. We're back to Larry
You know,
and Beatrice.
if you are a believer in God, there comes a time when you must know that God's judgment comes against all evil ultimately. And as Marla just said, she brought up the reparations question. I'm not a fighter for reparations. I don't think logistically it could work. I think the push came too late, even though Black people have been pushing for a long time. But I heard a Black economist, Dr. Claude Anderson, say one time that there was a time in the totem pole of American society where whites were on top, and then next was Blacks, and then perhaps Hispanics, and then Asians. Well, that has changed now. African Americans are now number 4 behind whites, Hispanics, and Asians. So his theory was that if we didn't get what was due to us when we were number 2, what makes us think we're going to get it when we're number 4? And the makeup of America has changed so tremendously over the last 50 years, where it's not just Black and white no more. You know, you got immigrants, you got Asians, you got Africans coming over from Africa and the Caribbeans who have no connection at all with reparations. They're not coming over here for reparations. They don't care about reparations. And so, you know, to say that these trillions of dollars are going to be distributed, no, that's not going to work. So somebody might call me and going against the grain. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Beatrice?
Yeah, I take real exception with his light touch of critical race theory in the last paragraph, because the way it has been used has had serious consequences, and the way people have jumped on the CRT bandwagon and affected school boards and just done real harm is important, and it is real. And he's just kind of pretending this is not a real debate, and he briefly mentions Kimberly Crenshaw. That some of this, and again, you don't know what people's motives are. Sometimes I think people stake a position because it is contrary to what people are saying, and to some degree, as intelligent and bright as he is. And I've heard webinars with him. I've heard him speak and all of that. I just think to some degree, some of this, he's a contrarian. And I think the unfortunate thing is that people are comforted by much of what he says, especially the title of this book being How a New Religion Has Betrayed Black Americans. That's a strong word, a strong outlook. And I find it concerning. I find McWhorter concerning, and I just take exception with a lot of what he says, especially when we are in a serious position with what happens to African American people in this country, whether it's the judicial system, whether it has to do with distribution of healthcare, well, every maternal mortality, just when we look at that and how our people suffer, to kind of give an out for people and to say that, well, it's either their fault, however he's framing his argument, I find concern with.
Thank you, Beatrice. I believe it's Teresa. Go ahead, Teresa.
Okay, thank you. I am definitely for reparations. I don't think enough time has passed to give descendants of those who were enslaved money. And we can do this the same way we always manipulate wealth in this country, tax breaks. If anyone thinks that we're really going to get like that 40 acres and the equivalent of a mule or whatever, I wish I can remember the name of this book, and maybe I'm not even going to look it up because I'm typing while listening to this conversation. So forgive me. But there is a book that talks about the history. It was written by a Black woman. It talks about the history of our tax code, and it's absolutely amazing how wealthy white men has shaped how we pay our taxes. And I thought it was really interesting. You know, if you and your spouse make $50,000, you're going to pay more taxes individually, even though you're filing married, than one individual making $100,000, because this white man, wealthy white guy, who argued and lobbied, and basically it's his buddies, you know, you got enough money, you know, politicians, and the law is shaped that way. So let's not pretend that the tax codes cannot be changed such that those of us who are descendants of slaves cannot get that money. It is not a problem. It's only a problem if you don't want to solve it. So that was my that was my thing about reparations. And I get really tired of hearing about how hard it's going to be when it's wealthy people. It's never hard to change that tax law. They get that, they get what I'm trying not to curse right now, because it really does anger me how when rich people want the tax code to change, it changes. They get to keep their money and not pay their fair share. So there you go.
Thanks. Larry?
I think there's a
clarifying
clarifying question for me.
Yes.
Let's go. You're on mute, Reverend Larry.
Okay, clarifying question.
Yes, sir.
Are you to suggest that the Black lineage that had no connections to slavery?
Absolutely not. I already know
Oh.
what that question is going. I already know that our enslaver was a white man named Strange, and we have it documented. There is no, I do not believe that people who immigrate recently and never can prove that their ancestors were enslaved. I am the third generation freeborn Strange from my great grandfather, Jesse Strange. We have documentation. There is no, oh, I'm the Nigerian prince who's, you know, blah, 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 blah. None of that scammy crap. It was a business. It put human people, and I know I'm not supposed to, whatever. So if there's somebody else on the list, we can go and I'll cut my answer short. But remember, chattel slavery was egregious, but it was also a business, and it made cotton. The sale of cotton and other crops made the United States the wealthiest friggin' country during that time. It was a business. They kept records. Okay. So all of this, oh God, I'm trying not to curse, but all of this propaganda that's saying that so much time has passed and that we don't know, and as if records weren't kept, is all BS. That's all part of the narrative of why not to do reparations. And it's so hard and it wouldn't be easy to track down. Yes, it is. Let's not forget, it was a business. They kept records.
I might call for
Okay.
a point of order here.
Okay.
No, yeah, Larry, if you'd like to get on the list, no one else is sitting. You can go straight ahead if you want.
Okay.
And then
Yes.
we have Beatrice. Well, actually, did you want to go straight ahead, or should I go to Beatrice?
No, I could go straight ahead, because my straight aheadness is just a clarification question. You know, there was a verse of scripture in the Bible that says, be quick to listen and slow to speak. Teresa didn't listen at my question. And so I did not finish my question, and you spoke a little bit too quickly. And I think if you had listened at my question fully, you may have understood the context to which I was about to ask it. But I'm gonna leave it there. I'll get back on the list later on.
Okay, do you want to be back on the list now after Beatrice?
No, I'll wait.
Okay, all right, Beatrice.
I'm always excited about conversations about reparations. When I lived in New Orleans, there was a group, I'm not sure if they still exist, and that was our purpose. I cannot remember the name of the group, but I think the only question is, people have to come to the conclusion that something is owed. That's number one. Something is definitely owed. To whom is it owed, and how is it paid? That's you have to get there. You have to get there. We talk about Japanese internment and the $20,000 people were able to figure that out. And the question is not, so you may talk about no federal taxes for 10 years. You may talk about free tuition. You may talk about changing tax code. The point is, something is owed. To whom is it owed? And how do we repay? There is no question that the economic stability of this country was built on the free labor of people stolen from the continent of Africa. People who question that need to look at history, look back, even Wall Street. Every economic group that was sustained in this country was sustained because of the free labor of persons that were stolen from the continent of Africa. And when Field Order number 15 was written and they gave us those old mules that they had used in the Civil War and those 40 acres, we farmed that land like crazy. We were doing something. And of course, Lincoln gets assassinated. Johnson says, that's not their land, give it back to the people. At every turn, during Reconstruction, when we were doing something, we were making some gains, taken away. At every chance to survive, to thrive, to show that we were people who could make it, it was deprived of us. So every step we've made forward, somebody's pushed us back 3. So for the argument that who pays it, how much is the fact, we begin with the fact it is owed. To whom is it owed? How do we repay?
Okay, thanks, Beatrice. The list is open at the moment. All right, Reverend Larry, go ahead.
You know, again, I believe God's judgment is going to be the final arbiter. And when you're dealing with a country with a $34 trillion deficit, I mean, you could see the hammer already coming down on this nation. How long do we really think we can survive a $34 trillion deficit? Now we're going to add to it without any addition of taxes. You got 2 ways to deal with such deficits: drastically cut back spending or drastically raise taxes. And neither one of those are going to be done. I'm not saying in due time, in its place, reparations were not due and they should have been paid. They should have been paid. But now things have changed. There were opportunities that and I think this is what McWhorter is kind of trying to say. There were opportunities that Black folk blew in the past. We blew opportunities. And even now, something else that McWhorter might be saying, you know, we're talking about criminal justice reform, as if Black folk are just almost destined to go to prison, and we must do something to let them out once they get in. Not counting the victims that's involved, not counting that it is ungodly for 4 little Black teenagers to go out there and hijack a woman's car and drag her till she's dead. We can't make excuses for that kind of stuff. That, you know, just as those at the top, if they don't confess that they got where they are because of white supremacy in this nation and injustices and things of that type, but when they talk about crime, they always talk about the little man on the street. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. So we're letting the people at the top off, and we're putting all this anti-crime legislation against a little guy on the street that already feel abandoned. Justice must flow from the top to the bottom. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. And we have Louise next.
Gosh, now I've got too many things that were spiraling around my brain. Beatrice, yes. First of all, we all need to agree that something is owed. There is no doubt about it, and how to do it. And I also agree, taxes less taxes, no taxes, free education. There's so many other things. And Larry, you say that we're in deficit. How are we going to manage? Are you kidding? There is so much money. It's just misspent and misappropriated. It's ridiculous. No, I mean, I'm a bit of a socialist, I have to admit, but there should be a cap on how much people earn, as far as CEOs and the wealthy. I mean, it's disgusting the amount of money people have and how little others have. Distribution of wealth, sorry, is probably not very popular with many people, but I totally agree with that. So there's a lot of money. There is a lot of money around. And also, I think it was Teresa that said that, you can trace back, and no, it was Larry. Anyway, that how are you ever going to know that they are from enslaved people? I don't think it really matters at this point. Even if people come over from a free country, but they have black and brown skin, they're going to be victims of racism, and they're going to have to deal with inequalities. So yeah, give them free education as well. I mean, gosh, I pay my taxes. I don't mind if some of this money goes to something like that. I am totally for it. I think that is it. Well, I know it is because I'm looking at my timer, and that's it.
Thank you, Louise. Phyllis.
So, yeah, I say give everybody free education. Give everybody
Yeah.
health care that actually they can afford the medications they need for maintaining health, and also have a health system that works on promoting health and not just treating illness. I mean, that's a big problem.
Mhm.
There are lots of people not paying their fair share of taxes in this country. We know who some of them are. We probably don't know about a lot of them. It's not anybody on this screen right now. I'm gonna assume nobody's like a billionaire. There's lots of billionaire money out there that we could be taxing. And I don't understand the concept justice must flow from the top, because I don't know when justice has ever flowed from the top. It starts at the bottom, and societal change is demanded and made. And that is how societies have improved themselves. The civil rights era is an example. That wasn't starting at the top. That was people at the bottom making life difficult for the people at the top who had to enact change. So I'm a white person. I don't really understand why there are Black people who don't want reparations. Kind of confuses me. I think we've got all these automated systems that can be, if it's reparations for slavery, I have to say, Louise, people who came and were not descended from enslaved people, I don't think they would be qualified. Like I said before, Barack Obama wouldn't qualify. Michelle would qualify, but Barack wouldn't qualify. His mother was white and his dad was from Canada. And we can find these things out with the technology we have today. Thanks.
Hey, Phyllis, I believe the list is open at this point. Okay, we have Larry and then Teresa. You're on mute, Larry.
I try to respect the protocol, but keep forgetting to put
Okay.
myself back off mute. But Louise, you talked about, Black and brown skinned people coming over from other countries, free education or whatever you had said. But you may not know that a lot of Blacks coming over from other countries don't necessarily commingle with traditional African Americans. They do not see themselves in the same light. They're coming over to America to get into the system and to excel. A lot of them not coming over with sympathy of what happened in slavery. So there's sometimes a great gulf between the African American blacks and the blacks coming over from other countries. And you know, you want to follow the power in this country, follow the money. You know, politics is money. There's no money at the bottom of the totem pole. And if there's no money at the bottom of the totem pole, there's little power. But we allow ourselves sometimes, even as blacks, to think that the power's in going to the polls and voting. I keep hopping on that bandwagon, but we have been disillusioned. And I think one of the things McWhorter is talking about, that when there are blacks who may go contrary to the grain, then you're an outsider. You know, you're speaking against racism and you're speaking against your people and things like that. I've been black for 76 and a half years. And all of my experiences, I've studied other people, I've read other people, and okay, that's it.
You can go and finish your sentence, Larry.
No, I'll just get back on the list.
Okay.
Sometimes
Right.
you get to the point where you begin to lose your train of thought.
Okay.
Right.
Teresa, you're up.
Yeah, but can I ask a clarifying question as it relates to
Sure,
something
Molly.
was said to Reverend Larry? You said that there were opportunities in the past that Black people had that we messed up or didn't take advantage of. Could you give me some historical examples of that?
Yes, thank you, Amal. Good to hear you. A great historical example is our HBCUs. I mean, when we were shut out of other universities, you know, ways were open up in HBCUs for us to get our education. But then when barriers began to come down, a lot of blacks felt that maybe I should go to a white institution because the sheepskin from there would look better if I graduated from Harvard and instead of Edward Waters College or Elkhorn or Southern. So I think there's a whole lot we could have done with those educational opportunities, and many opportunities were free. That's one example.
Thank you, Amal and Reverend Larry. We're on to Teresa.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, I did look up the book that I had alluded to earlier. It's called The Whiteness of Wealth by Dorothy Brown. Very, very enlightening. Don't let the fact that it's about tax code make you think it's a boring story. She goes behind the scenes and the narratives to explain it. And it's just like, wow, that is absolutely amazing. So that's all I wanted to do, is just say that I put that in the chat. And it's a very, very good read. I think I listened to it as an audiobook, but whatever it is, I highly recommend that book. And that would be how I would say the government should go about reparations, is tax code.
Thank you. Phyllis.
So I partially agree with what Larry said about voting. I think it in some way is a scam that keeps us kind of thinking we got some power, but recent events and the way our elected representatives, from the presidency to members of Congress, senators, Hillary Clinton, have really irritated me. There is no respect for the constituencies. Hillary went on, I think it's Seth Meyers, all those nighttime white guys are the same to me. At first I thought he was one of the Jimmies. And he said, what do you say to people who say, well, you know, we've got these two choices, and you know, she's like, get over yourself. That's exactly what she said. Get over yourself. And I'm like, what? She's so out of touch. A lot of them seem to be out of touch because they're really not serving the people who elected them. They're serving these political action groups and yeah, the money. They're serving the money. and they want to stay elected, they want to stay in office so they can keep getting the money. And it is a fallacy to believe that that we have to vote for one of these two choices for president in November. We do not have to vote for either of them. That's my plan. Not voting for either of them, not voting for anybody who's a Democrat, because I can't think of any Democrat except for those two women who I don't think are going to make it on the ballot in Louisiana, who are against genocide. That's my deal breaker. And you can make all the promises you want about getting Roe codified again or whatever. They had chances to do that and they failed, and because they don't really care. Yeah, perfect.
Thank you, Phyllis. I believe the list is open. Yes, Reverend Larry.
Yeah, it's kind of brings me into remembrance of my Bible study when I thought I'd be taught something and I asked questions and nobody said nothing. So sometimes just to break the ice, I ask questions. So, but and sometimes, just like I said the last time, sometimes your train of thought leave you, and you'd be best to just shut up and say, "I'll get back on the list," you know. But I think voting might be one of those areas that McWhorter may have spoken of again, because if I say something, especially to some Black people, like I don't plan on voting in November. Oh, you betraying the blood of Black people who lost their life on the streets of Mississippi and Alabama for you to have the right to vote. And that's exactly what I have, the right to vote and the right not to vote. And I always felt that I was selling my vote or prostituting my vote if I had to go to the poll and vote for the lesser of two evils. That's not respecting those who died for me to have the right to vote. So I never have gone to the polls and just pull a lever because somebody was a Democrat, or because somebody was Black, or because somebody proclaimed to represent this, that, and the other. My vote is precious to me. And when I vote, I could be a one-issue candidate sometimes. Like abortion would cause me to be a one-issue candidate. A guy could believe in 99 things I believe in. But if he adamantly is favor of abortion, he may lose my vote. When we lose any sense of right and wrong, then as a society, we've lost it. It's not a question of, it is a question of morals. Whether you're a religious person or not a religious person, whoever you are, you have a sense of morals. There is a sense of right and wrong. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Teresa.
Thank you. I want to just confess the bias that I had. When I first saw the title of the article before I even read it, and it talked about woke racism, I really thought the article was going to take a different take altogether. And I thought, oh, okay, cool. Maybe we're going to talk about how liberals are always looking for trauma porn. And I put an example of a movie that came out a couple of years ago, and I think it's on Netflix, called 40-Year-Old Version, not virgin, but version,
Yeah.
Version. If some of you have seen it and you know exactly the movie, I put the trailer, the whatever in it. And it talks about a Black woman who's a filmmaker and she wants to make really poignant movies or whatever, but she can only really get funding if she was talking about the very worst things, like a 15-year-old who became pregnant and birthed a crack baby and then went to jail. And that's what we call trauma porn. And I thought that this article was going to be about how, and you know, obviously it's not, but I was looking forward to reading the article because I thought, oh, the woke racism where liberals aren't going to listen to you unless, you grew up in the ghetto. They want to hear a particular narrative. And so I must admit that because the title alone had me thinking, oh, this woke racism, yay. And then it was like, no, that's not what this article really is about. And I was a little disappointed. Not that you chose it. Again, it was my assumption because I misunderstood what he meant by woke racism. I'm glad you chose the article. I was like, oh man. And if you've recently seen the movie American Fiction, that's another one of, to me, a black, the great actor Jeffrey Wright plays this black author who writes really cerebral stuff, but because he's a black man, it's like, no, we don't want that. We want trauma porn. So I'm just putting it out there that if we ever want to do an article, or one of you guys want to talk about trauma porn and how black people really want to discuss our struggles, but it's not always the same little narrative. So I was just putting that out there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I believe we're back to an open discussion at the moment. Anybody wish to be next? I guess we have about 5 minutes or so if we're going to wrap up on the hour. So we've got a little time yet.
We wrap up at 11:30, don't we?
I mean, as far as
Well, you
before
have
we
to
go
start
into
the
the
wrap up before 11:30. That's what he means.
right, right.
Oh,
I meant the regular discussion. Go ahead, Larry. Yep, you're on mute again, Larry.
still muted.
You're
Okay.
muted.
I'm
There you go.
sorry, I got
Okay.
myself off the screen. But I think when he speaks in terms of the religion of anti-racism, my understanding is that he's speaking from the standpoint that if you speak about racism, you've got to speak within this context. And you speak contrary to this context, which might be the popular opinion, then you don't know what you're talking about. You don't have the right to this opinion because that's not the way a lot of black people look at racism, you know. And you have this this pastor, Reverend Barber, I think y'all may have seen him, walks with a crutch and like that. But he's looking at this whole battle from a different angle, and not so much as the color of skin, but also from the standpoint that poor whites have also allowed themselves to be used by a racist system. Used so much that they don't even know they're being used. As long as they could be anti-black, they could be as poor as dirt. But as long as somebody could talk to them and say that the poorest white in West Virginia is better than the best black in New York City. And they bought into that philosophy, but I think Reverend Barber is trying to wake up the whole nation that this thing is not only a skin color issue, it's a class fight, you know. And but when we stick to this one argument that everything is about skin color, you know, everybody that's got dark skin don't think alike. You know, some people with the darkest of skins, Tim Scott, Clarence Thomas, you know, they think from the standpoint of the same people that oppress them. So is Clarence Thomas gonna get reparations? You know, Tim Scott? I think not. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Yes, Louise.
A very quick answer to that. Of course, they're not going to get reparations because they don't need it. It would be for people who are applying for college, or, you know what I mean? Like, just be a blanket thing. It would be if need, if you know what I mean. So yeah, that's obviously someone who's, anyway, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Teresa.
Yeah, I just put one of my favorite LBJ quotes in the chat. It sounded like Reverend Larry was making a reference to it. And it says, if you can convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. Hell, give him somebody to look down on and he'll empty his pockets for you. That's what LBJ had said. And it sounded similar to what Reverend Larry was also saying. So anytime I can share that LBJ quote, I will.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Phyllis.
Yeah, hopefully I can remember what I was gonna say. I think I might have forgotten. Let me come back.
Okay, Phyllis. In the meantime, anybody wish to go ahead?
I'll speak.
Okay.
Yes, as it relates to reparations, I think we're talking about reparations in such an abstract form. You know, a lot of people don't realize. I'm amazed that whenever the conversation about reparations relates to how we're going to give it to the descendants of slaves in the United States, there's always these nuances about, well, how are we going to pay it? What are we going to give them, tax cuts? What are we going to do? There's always this extra stuff that added into the equation. We didn't have these conversations when it came to paying other people reparations in the United States, i.e. the Japanese, i.e. Native Americans, and so on and so forth. All these conversations didn't take place. We just knew that it had to be done, and then we did it. A lot of people don't know, actually, white men actually got reparations in this country. And a lot of people don't know when that was. It was right after slavery, right after the Civil War. White men received reparations for loss of property. Guess who their property was? Slaves, the slaves that they owned. So this conversation about reparations that we're having, we only add the extra additives in there when it comes to talking about paying the descendants of enslaved Africans in this country. Otherwise, we just give up the money. We're paying migrants in I believe it's in Chicago right now. They're actually getting a stipend from the government right now. Ukraine refugees getting stipends from the government right now. Where that money coming from? Because nobody asked, nobody, we have a conversation about tax cuts and who gonna pay them and where the money, we ain't had all that conversation when it came to giving those people money. But somehow, when it comes to the descendants of enslaved Africans, we have to have this conversation about how it's going to get paid. So that's my problem with this argument about reparations is this, and no, every descendant of African people who were enslaved in the United States gets money. I don't care how rich or how poor they are. So yes, Clarence Thomas too, I don't agree with him, but he's still a descendant of slaves. So he gets reparations. The billionaire Jay-Z gets reparations. I don't care how rich or how poor they are. They're the descendants of people who were enslaved in this country. They get reparations, bottom line.
Thank you, Mal. I believe Phyllis is up again.
I'm ready. Yeah, maybe that white rich guy who's paying for a lot of trips for Clarence Thomas, maybe he's just doing personal reparations. Could be. I also want to say, back to the article, McWhorter doesn't really, so he doesn't like what he calls woke racism, which is, I agree, Teresa, it's not the right term, or anti-racism. And he also probably doesn't like religion because he actually compares what he doesn't like to religious frameworks. And again, that's why that didn't work for me. I don't think religion is about, shouldn't, some are, let me be clear, some are, but it shouldn't be about casting judgment on people and saying that they don't belong and they're dirty and they're sinful and yada, yada, yada. It should be calling them in to a loving community that isn't going to judge them, that's going to help them grow. And the fact that he puts the most negative spin on using religion as an example of this religion of anti-racism, that's really troubling. So, and I just want to say my favorite linguist will always be Noam Chomsky. He's the king.
Oh, yes.
He's the king.
Just Who was that? I didn't catch that, Phyllis. Who was your favorite?
Noam Chomsky.
Oh, Noam Chomsky. Okay.
He's the best, and I got to see him in person once, and it was so exciting.
And I think he's still kicking.
Wow.
He's been.
Wow.
I think we're getting towards the wrap up. Maybe we can go with one more if there is one more person that'd like to talk, and then we'll start the wrap up.
Yeah, I'll say something as it relates to woke racism. And he says woke racism, how this new religion has betrayed Black America, and being that that's the subtitle of the conversation, I don't think he did an effective job in the article at explaining how this new religion betrayed Black America. I didn't get what he was going with it. The examples that he gave, like a corridor in San Francisco, using terms like reverse racism, or somebody made fun of the Asian lady, and something to that effect in the article. It just didn't give me enough ammunition to be able to understand exactly what he means when he says that this new religion called woke racism has betrayed Black America. I mean, either you're a racist or you're not. Either you're fighting against it or you're not. And I don't understand this term woke racism that he's using, because for me, he hasn't given an accurate understanding or definition to what it is and how it works and how it has betrayed Black America in the process. So if anybody could help me understand what he means by that, I'd appreciate it.
Good. On that note, I think we can start the wrap up, and going to the upper left, we'll start with Phyllis.
Thanks. This was a really good conversation, Harvey. The article definitely sparked, good conversation, different points of view, and you did a great job facilitating. Thank you. I hope you'll sign up again.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Marla.
Yeah, this was a great discussion. I really enjoyed all of the different perspectives, and yeah, I don't know. I'm still curious to learn more about John McWhorter, so I might go down that route after we hang up. Thanks. It was a great discussion.
Thank you, Marla. Beatrice.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the discussion and great job, Richard. When my dad went to register to vote, they wouldn't register him. And so he, at that time, was working for the Boy Scouts in a position. And the white person in charge of him called the registrar and said, "I'm sending Bob Perry down there. He will have on a Boy Scout uniform. You will register him." And he did. Somebody had to speak for my father. I always vote. I look at voting as my voice. I look at voting as if somebody came to me, "Beatrice, who do you want to be governor?" And I'm going to always answer. My vote is my voice. And I will always vote. And I will hold the feet to the fire, because I live in Atlanta, to the Capitol. I go down to the Capitol with others and advocate once people are in office. But I'm not going to ever be silent. If somebody comes to the table and say, "What do you want to drink?" and I don't answer, and then they just bring me sewer water, it's my fault, because I didn't tell them what I wanted. So please, voting to me is precious, it's priceless. I will always speak. I will always. Thanks for a great, great conversation.
Thank you, Beatrice. On to Marion.
I just want to thank everyone for their comments. I didn't say anything this time, but my thoughts were racing. And I thought this was a very great discussion, and I appreciate everybody's comments. So, Harvey, you did a good job facilitating. Thanks, everybody, for your comments. I really appreciate them.
Thank you, Beatrice. Teresa.
Yes, I appreciate the article. Beatrice, I feel the same way that you do about voting, and there are no small elections as far as I'm concerned. I take the local ones just as serious as I do the presidential ones. And apparently the Republicans in North Carolina, I think it's a Black guy who's running. I try not to know his name, but he's running for governor, I believe it is, and he thinks women shouldn't have the right to vote. So if nothing else, voting against that blankety blank is, I mean, I was already motivated to vote anyway, but just, they keep saying, well, abortion is now a problem for Republicans, but some Republicans want to solve it by taking away even more rights from women. So nothing is ever going to stop me from voting except for death. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. On to Louise.
Great analogy, Beatrice. I love the analogy of the swamp water. Way to bringing you the swamp water. And oh gosh, there was another thing. God darn it. What else was I going to say? Oh gosh. Oh, obviously not important. But yeah, Richard, you did a great job for first time on screen, and yeah, that was really good. You should definitely do more because it takes pressure off the one or two or three that do. Gosh, I wish that last thing, I can't remember it. Oh, Amal, something Amal said. Oh, that's right. That yeah, I agree with you. I don't think he made that clear at all what he really meant. So I agree with that. Anyway, have a great weekend, y'all.
Thank you, Louise. Reverend Rev, go ahead.
Thank you, Richard. I think the more this conversation went on, the more clear it became to me when he speaks in terms of calls religion of racism, and just like something Phyllis said a moment ago about bringing people into the tent and letting them know about love and everybody will be talking about God's love. God is a loving God. But then when you get outside the box and you say, yes, he's loving, but he's also a God of justice. He's a God of anger. He's a God of revenge. Then you're going contrary to what might be presented as a popular opinion. You're neglecting the fact that God destroyed the Jews of the Old Testament because he got angry with them and because they lost their status. So we got to look at the whole big picture, and everybody don't speak with one tongue in the Black community, and that's what a lot of Black people get mad if you speak with a different point of view. You're going contrary to the grain, and I'm just sort of a contrary to the grain person sometimes. Thank you. Good article, Richard.
Thank you, Larry. And we'll end with Amal.
Yeah, great article. I've seen this guy speak on plenty of occasions. This is not the first. He's wrote plenty of books before this. Being a linguist, I remember a book he wrote some time ago as it relates to the different vernaculars that Black people use that other cultures don't in our English. So it's not the first time that he's written. I'm pretty familiar with this guy. I just don't understand what he's talking about with this particular article. I mean, with this particular book that he wrote. In the context of this article and what he's talking about. But great article. And as it relates to something that Beatrice said with the sewer water, the if the waiter chose to bring you sewer water, the issue wouldn't be whether he chose to bring it to you or not. The issue would be whether you drank it. And that's my issue, is that I'm not drinking from the Democratic or the Republican Party fountains because they all dirty. so that's my take. Everybody have a good weekend though.
Thank you, Amal.
Good to see you, man. I ain't seen you in a while. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah.
Definitely, it's good to hear from you too. And I like to respond to many of the comments I've been hearing over the last hour, and to Mr. McWhorter's article I'm going out on a limb a little bit, I think, on this, but what I'd like to do is to go back briefly to a couple anecdotes I've heard way long ago in racism meetings. And I want to contrast these two stories that I heard as a way of giving my take on where McWhorter is coming from. The first story, again, this is going back, way back into our face-to-face days, was told to me by a longtime racism member. And she remembers as a little girl at Mardi Gras being, I won't say the word attacked, but she had a fairly violent altercation with a person at a Mardi Gras parade. And this person who was, let's say, melanin deprived, who was not African-American, used the N-word. And it left a lasting impression on her. And it did on me, because I remember that story being told those many years ago, and it clearly had an impact on this person. And I give this story as an example of what I consider to be an example of overt racism. Here was a little African-American girl that was in a physical altercation at a Mardi Gras parade, and the N-word epithet was shouted at her. I mean, if that isn't overt racism, I don't know what is. And I think that's the kind of incident that McWhorter himself would say, clearly that's a racial incident, and it reflected, unfortunately, the spirit of the times among way too many New Orleanians back then, way too many. Definitely not all, but way too many. The second incident I want to talk about also goes back many years, and it has to do with another longtime racism member who told this story at one of the meetings. The first story I told you was kind of told to me privately on the side after the discussion. The second one was told during the discussion. And this had to do, and this goes back ways, and my memory is, I'm going to be definitely paraphrasing, but it had to do with a reunion at which this racism person attended, a college reunion. And at this reunion, again, a European-American woman came up and said, you know, I've always admired you, and I've always considered you a great friend, and I've had a lot of respect for you. And your color didn't mean anything to me. I didn't see your color at all. And again, paraphrasing it as I remember it, the recipient of this remarks felt, I would almost use the word offended. Now, I may be wrong in saying that, but she felt offended because she felt that her color was being ignored, and that you can't obviously ignore that you're speaking to an African-American in this case. Now, this is an example of where I think McWhorter has a lot to say, because this is an example of where McWhorter would say that the intent of the woman who made the remarks that were taken as offensive was clearly not racial in character. It was it was a mischaracterization of, well, I won't even call it a mischaracterization. The fact that she was using that she was ignoring the person's color, and I believe in McWhorter's sense would be an example of where McWhorter would say that we're getting too caught up in the language and the words we use and the misunderstandings that take place, and the unfortunately too often idea that a person's feelings kind of take precedence when we talk about discussions of race. And that, contrary to the first story I told, where you had an overt expression of racism, in the second story, I think McWhorter would say, you know, this was just in some ways an unfortunate exchange, but definitely no racist intent was meant. It was just taken the wrong way from the person who received these comments. So this kind of gets into what I'm thinking is McWhorter's approach, I think, does more to advance racism's commitment, our group's commitment to treating all human beings with respect and compassion and empathy, regardless of their background. And, you know, I think this also talks about, and this is where I think even McWhorter stops short, but you've heard me talk about this again. I think as soon as the word, and Larry, you got into this a little bit, as soon as color enters into the conversation, particularly the concept of white and whiteness. And I'm comparing it to the fact that we've eliminated the words red and yellow when we're talking about Native Americans and when we're talking about Asians. I think that we ought to go a little bit further, and I kind of think McWhorton would go along with this. To the extent that we can eliminate color, the discussion of color, and it's virtually impossible to do, as we've seen throughout this conversation, and it's difficult for me to say so-called white person or a European American because it's so much easier to say white. But the fact is, white, I think from McWhorton's point of view, talking about whiteness and blackness is the very problem he's getting at. We're caught up in language too much when we try to talk about who's racist, who isn't. It's the overt actions that we need to be concerned with. What happened to this little girl on Mardi Gras Day was overt. And those are the kinds of actions I would think McWhorton would want us to address, those overt actions. And that we've got to come to terms with the words we use that do more to obscure racial discussion than they do to advance it. There's more I can say about it, but I'll kind of leave it there. And I do appreciate all of you, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.